improvised episode of the Beirut Banyan. And this is the 5th day of protests in Martyrs Square, Riyadh Salah, throughout downtown, and of course throughout Lebanon. And things are moving. The Prime Minister announced today a reform package. There is now massive debate over whether or not that kind of package can deliver change. The protests are continuing. Of course, there's an upswell of emotion that these reforms are not enough, and it doesn't seem like the protesters are going home. I left Martyrs Square, went home to reflect a bit on the last 24 hours, and I decided to convince a friend of mine who's in the same building as me by chance to come down and share her thoughts, because she's been with me the last few days, watching things happen, and I think she has a sense of maybe caution that's worth sharing, and I identify with some of that caution. And we've both been in these protests before, and I think there's this deep down reservation that we both have, and I wanted to unpack. And again, I apologize for the quick edits here. There will be some background noise and some unfortunate feedback, but otherwise the conversation is largely intact. So I hope you enjoyed this improvised episode of the Beirut Banyan. We're now just a kilometer away from all the protests happening in Ashrafi. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. So we've entered the 5th day of ongoing protests in downtown. Clearly, it doesn't look like the protests are fading. They're still ongoing. There are hundreds of thousands of people, literally, as we record, in downtown Beirut and throughout the country. People are protesting. This despite the Prime Minister assuring Lebanese today that there will be some reform. Before we jump deep into all of this, I have a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who's pretty much become a revolutionary spirit with reservations, like me. We happen to be in the same building. We've been going to the protests daily together, and this is the first time we decide to air out our potentially our opinions and perhaps disagreements on where things are moving. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Borgi. I studied economics at AUB, public administration at Columbia. I've worked previously at the UN and in economic research.
We're choosing not to go to the protests right now. We've been going every day. I was there earlier today, but we're not there right now. Mm-hmm. And I think this is because we both sense that there is a potential disappointment in the making. Maybe we can get to the bottom of this together. We've seen protests happen. We've both been involved in different protests in Lebanese history. Can for a moment, let's go back to the spirit of March 14.
Yeah.
In your gut reaction, your instinctual feeling, does this feel the same to you? 4 or 5 days into the protests that would lead to the March 14 movement. Does this feel the same way?
It feels the same in the sense that people are revolting. They have been really fed up with what has been. People have so much energy, you can say, but it's at the same time different. In the sense that you feel that now it's only the people in the street. You feel there is no one who gets on a stage and tries to give a speech or...
So it's leaderless because literally it's spontaneous and it's unexpected. It's highly unexpected. March 14 was a month-long movement in the making because it started off this way. If February 15, 16, 17, you didn't have leaders in Martyrs Square.
Yes, but it was triggered by speeches of leaders. Like I remember the famous speech after the assassination of Hariri. So maybe people were more encouraged to go to the streets because they've seen already a bold move from the side of the leaders. But for now, it's the people alone going to the streets against the leaders that
That's
they know.
interesting. So March 14 was supporting a segment of the leadership. This time around, there's no one visible that protesters are saying that's who we want in power.
I don't think March 14 was supporting some leadership. I don't like when it's labeled this way, actually. I was trying to say that March 14, people had like felt that they have this, that we can go and break the fear because leaders have done it.
Yeah.
A few hours earlier.
Yeah.
I think this was
so they were
in
leading
the background. Not because leaders asked people to go to the street. People wanted to go maybe anyways, but the fact that some leaders had already made this brave move of pointing to a specific party or person or country, the fact that some leaders did that, it gave a push to people to go to the streets and stay there.
And this time around, the momentum, it's clearly there. I mean, while we're recording, we're watching what's happening on TV together. There is real momentum without leadership.
Right.
Do you think this is sustainable without leadership?
I'm afraid it's not.
And so let's talk about this. Leadership, in your opinion, at this moment, who do you think can emerge to pull different people together, even though they're in common agreement on one thing, which is the economic deterioration of the country has reached an absurd level, and that's not going to be tolerated anymore.
Yeah.
But the bigger differences that we all know about, who do you think can emerge at this moment and keep this alive? If not, perhaps lead towards something which would be a revolution, changing the way Lebanon is governed, changing the state structure. Do you see anyone emerge, or is there any name that comes to mind? Because for me, I blank on that. I can't think of one person who would carry this mantle right now.
Yeah, it's not an easy question, especially that I don't see that there is... like during March 14, for instance, it was one goal, getting Syria out of Lebanon.
Yeah.
For now, it's not very clear what the goal is.
Yeah.
We can obviously state what we don't want, what we are sick of, but we cannot easily state what do we want to see happening from now onwards.
Yeah. And that means that's to you. I'm assuming here you mean more the political changes that didn't happen in the past, not so much the economic, because I don't think the economic factor was not really discussed in the previous, at least March 14. It emerged during the You Stink movement,
right?
But it wasn't really about economics per se. It was about corruption and it was
managing
about
the public
management. This time around, it seems like the money issue is really big.
Right.
When you say the other stuff, are you talking about the politics component? That's, in other words, the harder things that have been challenged before and had not succeeded? Or are you talking really just about corruption and money?
In terms of goals that this revolt needs to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, because otherwise, what is the next stage in something like this?
For me, I think the next stage should be about economic questions. It's more... it's easier to target. Like, you cannot change the political system overnight.
Yeah.
But you can, for instance, put a tax system.
So you're seeing this is a limited movement, that this is really just about reforming the economic structure of the state, not more than that.
No, it's not limited in terms of ambitions. I think people are being very ambitious, but I'm talking in terms of what can be achieved for now.
So in other words, the goals are bigger, but in reality, there
Yeah.
isn't much beyond the economic stuff, the corruption.
No, definitely there is like people are fed up with the system. It's obvious. It's not only about how the economic system in Lebanon is working. This was the thing that touched on people's daily lives and led to the revolt. But now, and thanks to that, we can say people are aware of the flaws in the system. And this is great. But this is great as a starter.
So okay, this is interesting. So in other words, this demonstration will only bring positive change.
At least positive, if it's either positive change or minor change, but it's gonna be positive. So
then, what are we doing here tonight? What explains our caution? Is it? And I don't mean to interrupt you here, but is it that we've been through this before, in different components? Of course, it wasn't about this crisis in particular. Is it because we've actually tried something similar before and it didn't happen, and we're used to failure? I mean, I'm trying to, because you and I spoke about this the day it was happening.
Yeah.
We were very cautiously hopeful and extremely careful to be optimistic, and we shared that opinion. And of course, this is not just us. There are many people that feel this way, yet they went anyway. What explains our reluctance to be fully supportive and embracing what's going on?
In my case, and I assume this is the case of many people, we have been through so much disappointment since 2005 onwards. And this is almost half my...
Well, it's your student years and your
my
professional
student years
life.
Onwards.
Yeah.
This is my adult life, actually.
Yeah.
It has been a series of disappointments on the political and on the level that has to deal with how things are in Lebanon.
You know, yesterday, I mean, half of the episode was the older generation sharing, in a way, their perspective on long-term failure, and they still retain this element of whatever it's called, hope, whatever it's called, a flicker.
Okay.
And they have reason, in a sense, because they grew up in a far better state. They grew up in the better years of this country's history, the ones that we only hear about, we don't know.
They have reason to be...
I mean, they have at least, they've seen the better years of Lebanese history.
Yeah.
And maybe they're trying to retain that, or maybe retain some of it.
Yeah.
We only know the bad stuff.
Right.
We're the war generation and the post-war generation, which was not great. I mean, 2005, which keeps coming up in all these conversations, is 15 years after the Civil War ended, and we were going through an uprising. I mean, that speaks volumes in itself. This uprising didn't happen in 1990. It happened 15 years. It is the length of the Civil War. And we went to the street, and we couldn't get it right. We couldn't manage. And now we're about 15 years later, twice as long as the Civil War itself. Is that a disappointment that it's just the length of time?
No, I think things need to take time. Although as a previous March 14 supporter or post March 14 generation, whatever you want to call it, I have wished it would these things would have happened earlier.
Yeah.
Like for me back then, it was obvious that the leaders that were leading the political leaders that were leading the movement were not gonna take us into the utopian state.
Yeah.
but it was clear that this is
Something positive was in the making.
yeah, exactly. That history was unfolding in a way, and we
Yes.
need to go through this
Mm-hmm.
until eventually better things happen.
Yeah.
And this is the better things that are happening right now.
Okay, so this is interesting. The March 14 movement there was a clear goal in mind, which was to reestablish Lebanon's sovereignty
Right.
and its independence,
Mm-hmm.
in particular with regards to Syria. 15 years later, you see that this is the natural next step in that.
Yes. I've wished it has happened earlier. I wished some parties that were already in March 14 didn't
Neglect this, that they didn't turn their
turn
away from it?
didn't neglect this or go in another direction. I wish people who were not in March 14 were there, so that history would have developed faster.
I want to get on maybe this is a touchy subject and we can explore it and disagree if you want. I mean, disagree as much as we want without killing each other. Unless one of us wins, and we can keep this going on our own.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, and I firmly believe this, that the failure of March 14 is not March 14's fault.
Okay.
And I think the fact that we did not re-emerge after the Civil War to a sovereign, independent state that could manage its own affairs and could deal with things like corruption and mismanagement. We're never going to be like Norway, obviously, but we don't need to be one of the worst corrupt societies on earth either. The fact that we didn't take the natural steps is because we didn't overcome the issue of sovereignty. That we still live in a situation where Lebanon's security and Lebanon's relations with the region, with the world, are not necessarily Lebanon's relations. That we still have a big component, and it's embedded in our society, but it's also a militant and it's a very critical component to regional war, and that's Hezbollah. And it's the subject that doesn't come up anymore. And in these protests, obviously, I mean, you hear the chants, right? Kullun, kullun, kullun means everyone, everyone, everyone. But even today, you don't see any accountability when it comes to Hezbollah. And I think that maybe because the moment right now is purely economic, that people are isolating the two. And maybe they need to.
Yeah, I don't think it's a wrong thing. The fact that the question right now is an economic question. This helps things to go in the direction you wish for.
Right.
Because when people are together and sharing the same problems, which is the economic question here,
which is impacting everyone here.
This helps in building this feeling of citizenry that we were lacking. And the fact that people are saying kullun yani kullun, that it means that now they are beyond these questions of.
Do you think it's reached that level though, that because we see it, Hariri, and we'll talk about this, he's become the face in a way of opposition towards the protests, which is an unfortunate place to be. He's, in a way, people are pointing the finger at him now. Do you think people are pointing the finger in every direction at the same level, or do you think that there are certain things that are just too difficult to touch, at least for the moment, and therefore they're going to be sidelined? And I'm probing this because I still feel deep down that even if you do get some cosmetic surgery from these protests, and tomorrow you find out that, there is going to be some accountability, that Lebanon as a state will not function properly so long as there are non-state groups that are armed and that are dictating Lebanon's policies. Am I being too pessimistic here?
It's true, and things got clear when Nasrallah gave the speech and said you cannot don't think that by these protests you can change the status.
He actually endorsed Hariri, which is equally.
He did.
Yeah.
He endorsed him, and maybe he took him hostage in a way. So this is actually, he's helping things develop in the right direction, because it's showing that for Hezbollah to stay in the to have things like, for Hezbollah, they want to have things their way, which means for them, in order to win on the foreign policy scene, they do not really care what's happening with people internally.
They care
and
only.
This is putting them in confrontation with people.
That's true.
People eventually will need to people who are urgently supporters of Hezbollah, they need to answer the question: what do we care about most? Our daily lives, our economic situation, or bigger questions such as foreign policy? People are now focusing on the economic question.
Yeah.
And the economic question, and the fact that some parties are disregarding the economic question for the sake of bigger questions such as foreign policy and their position internationally, is putting them more in confrontation with people.
So therefore, someone like Hassan Nasrallah is in a bad place too.
He is in a bad place
because
right
of
now.
the economic pain.
Right.
Okay. So the economic pain is an unusual unifying factor for Lebanon.
Because what has been happening with everyone is that politicians for years were neglecting the economic question for the sake of those bigger slogans.
Right.
And people are fed up with this. And this is what we are seeing right now.
Yeah.
It's exactly what Mashrou' Layla and their famous song Lil Watan, I can't recall
you're exposing,
the words.
You're exposing both of our ages here. We're too old for Mashrou' Layla.
No, we're not. But for some reason, maybe I'm too old, I can't remember the words.
Which is
exactly.
even worse. We've gone senile and now we don't remember. But the words.
I'll find it. But,
sure,
but the bottom line is that people are being distracted from real life problems, either by shallow things like pop culture or whatever, or bigger questions like foreign policy and stuff like that.
But now, right now, the fact.
Oh, I'm sorry. I found the line I was looking for in the song. It says بس تتجرأ بسؤال عن تدهور الأحوال بيسكتوك بشعارات عن كل المؤامرات خوانوك القطيع لما طلبت بتغيير للوطن. So I think this is exactly what has been happening.
Because it's worth it, can you translate right now?
So in the middle of the song, a line says, when you go and ask about how the situation is going badly, they shut you up by slogans about all these conspiracies.
So that's the distraction.
Yeah.
We've been distracted before, and movements have died because of that. We were distracted by sectarianism before, we were distracted by regional alliances, we were distracted by things like fear, and people let go of their passion and politics as a result of it. What are the distractions that can emerge now? Do you think because this is happening live. Hariri, just a few hours ago, announced a reform package. Is that going to distract these people and say, you know what, we got...
No, I don't think so, because it was well below below what's needed. I'm not gonna say people had very big expectations for...
Distraction, I don't mean it in the negative way. I mean, what would pacify these protests now? What do you think they need to hear? Because it doesn't seem, for the moment, it doesn't seem like Michel Aoun is stepping down. And it doesn't seem that there are protests against him in Ba'abda, which is where you would need those protests. Nabih Berri, it doesn't seem like he's stepping down.
Yeah.
There are no, even though we did see something unusual, we saw pockets where there were protests in his base in the south, in Sur. We saw people challenging him, but it didn't really gain momentum.
It did gain momentum, but they were trying to shut it down by force.
You're absolutely right, and there was a violent end to some of those protests too. You're absolutely right. But I'm talking about now, all this energy against Hariri. Is it really about him just stepping down?
No. It has happened before.
And he's resigned
Government's
before.
stepping down.
Sure, and he's been prime minister several times.
Yeah.
So what do you think is at stake now?
I think you kind of answered the question indirectly. I think what would be fatal to the movement is this discussion about who is more responsible about the situation we're in.
Right.
If the discussion goes into this direction, I think it can be very bad for the movement.
So in other words, the killun disappears and suddenly Hariri is more innocent than Berri, in that sense. Trying to really, like, what you mean by that. Yeah.
Yes, and if the only
Jaja
question...
resigning is not important.
If the only question is changing this government, and like, I'm trying to think of the potential outcome of this movement. If people are only... But I don't think anyways it's going in this direction. People pointing only on Hariri as a political group. They're pointing on him because he happens to be prime minister.
That's true.
And head of a cabinet, which presents the current administration.
Sure.
The executive administration.
Yeah.
But people need to not forget the fact that it's a problem with the whole system, and the system has been put in place somehow by all who has been in power.
So this system, if it sticks around, do you think the protesters will eventually just give up and go home? Or do you think this is now a life battle that either we get the system fundamentally changed or we don't go home?
I cannot imagine the system fundamentally changes overnight.
Well, but, okay, overnight is not going to happen, but in our lifetime.
I can.
You do?
No, I can, yeah.
Oh, because of these images?
Yes.
Okay.
Although as mentioned earlier, I have been very cautiously hopeful.
Yeah.
But if we go backwards to the 2015 movement,
which is the trash crisis to
the You Stink movement.
Yeah.
If you look at it, nothing has changed afterwards. We're not even aware what happened to the garbage that was in the streets.
We know, actually, we can smell it while we're recording. So
yeah.
this is we're just east of downtown. We're literally, maybe just a kilometer away from the protests, and we can smell the Burj Hamoud trash mountain. The wind is blowing, unfortunately, towards us. So we know what happened. It's in the sea. It's next to the airport. It's piled up in trash mountains, and on occasion burned.
Right. So on the level of what happened, like in terms of tangible results, nothing really came out of this movement.
Exactly.
But we can say that the current movement has built maybe on the previous one. It's an accumulation of.
Oh, you see this one as
continuation
of the You Stink movement?
Yes.
Okay. So this is where they left.
I remember back then in a conversation with my previous boss at work. He told me I don't know why this happened. Nothing came out of it. It was only something that has put in some instability in the country for a few weeks, and then it disappeared with no positive results.
Yeah.
And I remember telling him that I think this has put in place a dynamic that maybe one day, maybe, it's gonna drive something positive. So
this is 2015.
Yes,
Yeah.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I feel that this has built on the dynamic that happened in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And one can wish that a change in the system is going to build on this dynamic, which is people fed up with the system, being more aware of it,
all
of
communities
its flaws.
and all communities are experiencing more or less the same pain
Mm-hmm.
with trash
Yeah.
and with the lira crisis and the economy. But that's where March 14 didn't have that kind of unifying factor. The nation was
Definitely.
divided on Syria's role in Lebanon. So in a way, these are more threatening. In that sense, they're more threatening to the state that we have, because these are domestic issues. They're not regional. That this is purely a trash crisis is a Lebanese problem. It doesn't have a regional component to it per se. There's no direct line. Or for that matter, the economic burden, the corruption. It's an internal thing. It keeps people, to a degree, united because they're all experiencing it together. So in a way, the culmination of horrible mismanagement and toxic waste and environmental degradation and burning trees and water pollution and no economy, none of that, it takes all of these things to bring people together in Lebanon. I think that shows just how unfortunately powerful the system we have is, so entrenched and has survived periods of war and periods of immense pain, and we have fought several civil wars, yet we still inherited the same system.
I think one should be more realistic in terms of what to expect from the movement or what the movement is all about. Let's not put so much expectations.
Yeah.
The movement is not gonna solve all kind of problems at once.
Right.
But when I said earlier that it's helping build some type of citizenry, it's because people have a shared problem, which is common to all human beings, regardless of political alliances, regardless of regional alliances, regardless of usual political questions, which is having a decent life to live in their countries. The fact that they are tackling the same question for everyone in all parts of the country, this is helping build a sense of common identity that can be that we can build upon for more engaged citizenry. And when, for instance, people in Trablus chant for Sur, this is a huge.
Sure.
Let's remember where we were a few years ago. People had very negative views of each other if they were in different political camps.
You're absolutely right.
And now all this hype about Tripoli, it's amazing. People used to associate Tripoli with much more negative images.
Yeah.
And now I can imagine people in a few weeks going to Tripoli for tourism, maybe, I don't know.
And it's internal.
And this is great.
Yeah,
and this is what we have been lacking for years. there were some sense of disconnection between the parts of the country, and this common question of like the related to economic problems is bringing people together and reminding them that this is what the state should be all about, like giving people a decent life, giving them what's rightfully theirs, and this is what our country hasn't been doing for decades. So
it is definitely, perhaps later it'll be looked back on as the most important
aspect.
yeah, because Tripoli, that scene in Sehet Noor,
Yeah.
I mean, hundreds of thousands of people celebrating and dancing. I mean, this was a borderline rave party. I mean, without the drugs. And it was euphoric. And everyone watched this together in Lebanon. We were all happy for Tripoli. And we said this before as well. In the south, people were taking risk by challenging their respective leaders.
Yeah.
We don't see this that much. Actually, we rarely see it in Lebanon. And it was happening in places.
It's breaking stereotypes,
Absolutely.
which is huge for a country like Lebanon.
Absolutely.
After all, like what happened
Sure.
15 years.
And Tripoli taking down its leaders' photos.
Right.
They're doing it. It's not, right?
Someone else coming.
Sure. And in the south, similar attempt. And on a very small scale, today, just a few hours ago, a woman, and I think it was Kaslik on the highway, she took it upon herself to protest against Jaja. People came and threatened her, but there was enough support around her. And she's able to feel now that if she doesn't like him, she can say it in a place that maybe wouldn't be so hospitable to those views. It's a small example. These are symbolic. But they're important, though. You're right. People are not all necessarily on the same page because of their confessions. There's a diversity of views. And at least now, all people are in agreement, despite their traditional political differences, they all agree that the economic pain is unbearable.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the hope here. And it's these images that will keep people, maybe for the time being, on the street. If Tripoli is doing it, if the South is doing it, we should be doing it too. Maybe that's what it's all about. A WhatsApp tax would affect everyone in Lebanon. And maybe, it's interesting going back now. The fires was really, it was horrible. But it's the WhatsApp tax. Everyone identifies with this thing.
I think the fire contributed a lot.
Do you think without the fire, do you think this WhatsApp tax would have gone unnoticed?
No, it wouldn't have gone unnoticed. My first reaction to the WhatsApp tax that there's no way it's gonna pass.
Yeah.
Although
we were laughing at it as a horrible joke.
Although I remember they said, and I just read earlier today that it was voted for by all of the cabinet. No one objected.
That's true.
Even the ministers that have now resigned. But I couldn't imagine this tax
even its implementation
bill passing or being implemented. It actually passed in the cabinet, but being implemented. But there was this magical combination of fire followed by an outrageous tax proposal. So
Sarah, just to end it maybe on a swing between hope and despair, maybe give each one its own justice. The protests breaking out on Thursday. On Friday you're in Hamra. But you're in Martyrs Square. We meet. I drop you off in Hamra. It takes me about an hour or so to get back to Ashrafi because of the burning and the protests and the breakdown.
We didn't meet. You were in Martyrs Square, I think. I didn't start going until Saturday.
That's true. You're right.
I was more cautious than you.
You're absolutely... Wow, I'm losing track of time. So we meet again on Saturday, and it's suddenly very easy to go back and forth. There was a moment of panic when the violence was escalating in downtown. And I think that there was genuine fear that this is going to perhaps spiral out of control, and it didn't. and it's replaced by euphoric festivities that look almost more like a party scene than a protest. And you said something which I liked. You're equally cautious of both.
Yeah.
The violence, which is horrible, and also the maybe don't celebrate too quickly.
Right. I know this is the Lebanese way to do it, and it's interesting. It's what makes us different. This is maybe what we can say is a common identity as well for Lebanese. How we can find something to laugh about or to enjoy while in the middle of crisis, supposedly. But I think, I am a bit cautious of the festive aspect to it, because I think it's somehow like we're overdoing it in a way, because we need to remind ourselves it's all, at the end of the day, it's all anger and rage that we have, that has driven people to the streets in the first place. And we need to remember this. Also, regarding the violence that happened the first day, I can understand a little bit of violence. People are fed up at the end of the day.
Sure.
But I can also imagine this coming later, after, like, you start slow, and then when things don't happen the way you want, you maybe... it's interesting how here it happened the other way around. I think people maybe after what they have heard about the violence, maybe they wanted to take it in another direction. Maybe they overdid it with the festivals. I'm not sure, but it's all good.
Both can happen very quickly and within a few hours. And I think that's also a cautionary tale. I think this is part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you today, because you have well-earned caution. And I think, in a way, our generation is old enough to be a little more careful before completely saying, this is going to lead to fundamental change.
One last point. It's interesting that you said the older generation that you interviewed yesterday were maybe less cautious than we are.
Yeah.
And this has given me hope, because it means people who have seen more history, more who have been there for a longer period of time, they can be hopeful, because they are the ones who are able to zoom out and see how things evolve over years.
You're right.
And this has given me some hope that maybe because all we have seen, our generation, is disappointment, doesn't mean things cannot take a turn and change.
It wasn't just the youth in downtown, it was everyone.
Yeah.
And that was also good, because you do see people that have seen this happen before showing up. And it's ongoing, and we'll see where this takes us. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Two Lebanese of the same generation, watching things unfold together. Both of us have participated in these protests before, and we're both hopeful to a point and also cautious to a point. And we're both watching what's happening. Obviously, we're heading to Martyrs Square on a daily basis now, and we'll be back there tomorrow. I hope these reflections are offering perspective between the multitude of voices that are all in agreement that these protests should happen. And I'll keep these episodes going as quickly as possible. And once again, I apologize for the quick edits here. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.